So the first thing we're going to look at is the structure and functionality of part of the responder. And in particular, we're going to talk about the structure and functionality of a couple of pieces here of the responder, in particular, the parts that have to do with the QuotesConnectController and service and the QuotesMessageController and service. Some of this is very similar to what we did before. I will go through it very quickly. Others of it changed a bit, which I need to talk about so that it'll make sense when we talk about how we use ChatGPT here shortly. So the QuotesConnectController and QuotesConnectService are identical to what we did before, so I will go through this at lightning speed. Basically, their purpose in life is to take connection requests from clients and also to authenticate things to make sure that the client has got the proper login credentials to proceed. As usual, there's an auto-wired service. There's a method called handleConnect that takes the client requester and the client identity and goes ahead and tells it it's a connect mapping, so the server will get connected properly, and then it just forwards to the service. The service, again, we've gone over this before, it is going to have a map of connected clients, so it can keep track of who it's connected to. By the time we get this method called, we've passed the authentication portion, so that's been handled earlier by Spring and the RSocket security module. And so then the implementation just basically finalizes connection setup and handles client connection status changes. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So nothing really very interesting there that we haven't already talked about before, although it's interesting, just not new. Let's talk a little bit now about the QuotesMessageController and the QuotesMessageService. Although this isn't brand spanking new, I'm going to focus on different parts of it because I want to show you what we're going to use in order to get back random quotes that can be fed to ChatGPT for sentiment analysis. So there's a few differences here. So here we've got the QuotesMessageController, and it's wired to the service. We've got messages that come in for things like subscriptions and getting quotes, random quotes when you're subscribed. And this particular method confirms the client subscription request, so you get back something that's a valid subscription, a confirmed subscription. And then this method, which we haven't really talked about before, returns a flux that emits random quotes from William Shakespeare. And so that's the part that's really fun, and we'll talk briefly about how we do that. Here's the quotes message service. It's auto-wired to a database that uses the R2DBC model, the reactive model, so we'll talk about that. That's new. We didn't talk about that before. It's got a subscription set that keeps track of client subscriptions so people can tell if they're subscribed or not. And here's the subscribe method. This is ever so slightly different from the one we looked at before. The main difference here is we moved this to use records as opposed to classes. So we have to do a few other things because records are immutable. And here we go ahead and create ourselves a new subscription response saying we have a subscription with this request ID, with this William Shakespeare play, and we've confirmed it, and we add it to the subscriptions set. And then we return that back to the caller as a mono, so it can be emitted, and we'll get the results back. This is a more interesting method. This is the one that gets quotes if you're subscribed. And so what happens here is it's going to first grab the subscription out of the request. The random request is something we'll talk about later. Random request has got a subscription, and it's also got an array of random indices. These are basically indices into the database that keeps track of Shakespeare quotes. We use indices as a way to get random locations there. And the reason we have to put this into a single parameter called random request is with RSocket, you can only pass one element as a parameter to a message. You can't pass more than one. So you have to bundle things together. So we get the subscription request. We check to see whether or not the subscription is in the set. If it's not, then the person didn't subscribe as they're supposed to, so we bail out. But if it is subscribed, then we go ahead and make a call to the R2DBC database, and we say, please find everybody in this list of random indices by the IDs. So IDs, of course, are the random indices are IDs into the table. And so we're going to go get as many fluxes, or we're going to get a flux back to as many of these quotes that come from those random indices. And we'll talk about how we generated this method using the Spring Data API later. So that's really simple, really convenient, nice and reactive, and so on and so forth. And there's a ton more of this stuff, which we will talk briefly about when we look at the methods. But I just wanted to highlight the ones that are most important for the purposes of this example, where we're going to feed these random quotes we get back from this database over to ChatGPT. So that's the end of the first part of the discussion.